Hello everyone, welcome to Singapore Geospatial Week Plus 2020, an event organized by GeoWorks, Singapore Land Authority's Geospatial Industry Centre. Today we are excited to bring you Eugene Lau from URA to share on how URA plans for a livable city with GeoDesign. If you have any questions during the webinar, please leave them in the Q&A chat box and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. Thank you, and without further ado, I will now pass the presentation to Eugene. Eugene, please.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak for this event. Let me just first share my screen. Hi. Okay. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Okay, great. Hi. Yeah, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to let me share on this topic, which is very close at heart for myself. My name is Eugene. I'm from the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore, and I'm trained as an architect, but I've been planning Singapore with the URA for about 10 years. And my portfolio basically revolves around planning work, of course, in urban design, but also our team also focuses on the aspect of using digital data and systems in order to enhance the quality of work that we do when planning for Singapore. So today, my topic itself will be about how we shape Singapore and we plan the city to be a livable city with the help of GeoDesign. So without further ado, let me just start my slides. So a very quick snapshot of Singapore itself. Not too big, not too small. Okay, it is a city-state with a density about almost 8,000 person per square kilometer. And dimensions-wise, it's about 23 kilometers north to south and 42 kilometers east to west. And in comparison to other cities in the world, we can see that Singapore itself is, in fact, even smaller than Hong Kong. And of course, it's definitely smaller than big cities like New York City and London itself. So we are a very dense city with a lot of people, 5.5 million and counting, living in a small little island that most of us call Red Dot. So it is very important for us to plan properly and carefully for the long term. And when we do planning in Singapore, we have to bear in mind that Singapore is a city as well as a state. So unlike many other cities all around the world, we need to cater to the needs of both a city and a country. So what do I mean by that? By planning itself for a city and a country, we have to factor in things like housing, industry, commerce, recreational use, as well as larger needs like the airport, military training ground, and as well as reservoirs, which are located outside the city and around the fringe of the city. So it is very important to balance across these various needs and fit them within this very small island that we have, which has limited land. And when we do planning in Singapore, it's also within this context that we always refer to these three pillars for sustainable development, which is economic development, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability as well. And how do we translate these three pillars into the work that we do in the URA? We do so by different phases. Firstly, by the concept plan, which then translate into a more micro version of a plan called the master plan. And finally, down to even more micro processes like government land sales program, development control guidelines. And in a nutshell, this is how the URA do our planning work. And it is known as the Singapore's planning system. In this photo, you'll see, those of us who live in Singapore, you'll be very familiar with this image. This is a photo of Singapore River. And back then in 1960s, this is exactly how it looked like. No skyscrapers, full of boats, very dirty river. But compared to what it is right now, the present day, it is flanked with skyscrapers next to the CBD with beautiful shop houses that have been conserved, and also important buildings like, for example, the Parliament House, National Gallery. But all these things did not happen by chance because, for example, there was a massive move to clean up the river back then, which we identify it as valuable potential for waterfront development, and exactly this is what you see today on site. So many areas in Singapore are carefully planned to achieve different characteristics and planning visions. Now I will share with you how these plans are realized over time. First and foremost, the concept plan. Through many years of careful planning and execution, we have been able to seek out new solutions to address our limited land and physical challenges. And the first process that we use is called the concept plan, which is a long-term and a very strategic forward-looking plan that plans to almost 40, 50 years ahead of the horizon. And we review this every 10 years. And if you look at the plan itself, you'll see that the colors on the plan as compared to the master plan, for those of you who are familiar with that, it's actually not that multicolored. It only focuses on the main colors like purple for industry, beige for residential development, green for our nature reserves, and also, of course, blue color for commercial. In fact, if you look back in the history of Singapore's planning, this is the very first concept plan that was conceptualized in 1971, and you can already see that the structure of the city has already been planned back then, with the expressways, which are the black lines, and then with the airport located on the east, with the CBD located on the south, and then with the industrial areas located on the west. And all these things take a lot of time to come into fruition. Like, for example, the picture at the bottom that you see of Marina Bay, this was back then almost in 1990s, before the land was actually reclaimed. I'm not sure if some of you actually know that even the land that Suntec City and Marina Square now sits on were also reclaimed. So in fact, a lot of land was reclaimed, especially at the south of Singapore, for us to develop our city and to grow it over the years. Next, the master plan. So we zoom in a little bit more into a more parcel level plan. So now you can see that there are more colors involved in this plan. And this is indeed, in fact, gazetted plan. So it is legislation that people have to follow if they want to develop a certain development in Singapore. And I've zoomed in even further into an area in Punggol, which is somewhere in the northeast of Singapore. So you can see that on the master plan itself, there are numbers that we call the cross-plot ratio, or in other countries, they call this the FAR. This is to help the developer understand our guidelines very clearly, and this is fully transparent. The numbers stipulate the intensity that they can actually build on the parcel itself, and also the colors stipulate the type of land use that they can build within the parcel. And every 5 years, we review the master plan. We do a massive engagement exercise to stakeholders, and then we hold an exhibition and we gazette it after. So last but not least, I'd like to highlight that planning itself is a multi-agency approach. And through the whole planning and implementation process, from the concept plan to the master plan and then go on to land sales, we have to work with many different agencies, including SLA yourself, and even agencies like JTC, HDB, so on and so forth. So this integrated planning approach helps us to obtain buy-in and cooperation from many different agencies, because URA alone as an agency cannot do everything to make plans realized. So next, urban design plan. So what exactly is urban design plan? I get this question very often. So in summary, I would say that the urban design plan is an even further zoom in on the planning work that we do itself, and focuses on layers like, for example, building form, building height plan, public space allocation, the green and blue network, meaning the allocation of water bodies, of parks, and pedestrian connectivity. Last but not least, design review of the developments. Because URA itself is still, we are the planning authority of Singapore, we are a statutory board, and therefore we review submissions that come into us for approval. And in the past, we used to do so using 2D and 3D submissions, like for example, CAD plans, and even 3D submissions were done in 3D models of various formats like SketchUp. But nowadays, we are moving forward to the submission of building information model, BIM files, and we now use that for our design review because it is more efficient to work with the developers to actually review this kind of files that they can also use for their construction later on. URA also sells the land for the state. In fact, we are not the only statutory board that does so. HDB also does it along with JTC. And then with development control, there are very clear, transparent guidelines so that developers who want to build something on a piece of land knows that there are certain requirements that they have to adhere to. Like, for example, building setback or floor-to-floor height control. So you cannot just build whatever you want on a piece of land, even though if you have bid it for the piece of land and you have won it. So next, the making of our city. So this picture itself is a beautiful photo that the team took. I said our team took in the URA, and we actually got the question that asked us, is this actually a real photo or is this a photo render of the skyline? So I mean, of course, our reply to them is this is as real as it can be. You have to come to Singapore to see it for yourself. And but the point to note is that this photo itself took many years to realize, including MBS, the flower domes, and the flyer, and it takes a lot of careful planning in order to ensure that the vision is realized and does not go off track. So what is urban design? Because urban design does play a very important part in the sculpting of the city. And I often say that the urban design is essentially an art and a science, because it is not just design, it is quantifiable design. And we create memorable places for people. Like, for example, as a Singaporean, if you go down to Gardens by the Bay, you spend a day there with your family, it is a memorable day for you, and you remember the moments that you spent at the bay itself, like, for example, Countdown or National Day Parade. Sculpting the urban form of the city. So if you've been to Marina Bay, you realize that there are a whole array of tall skyscrapers that are surrounding lower buildings that are around the bay, so that when you walk around the bay, you do not feel too imposed, by the skyscrapers that are looking down at you. Activating the spaces between them. By this, I'm referring to public spaces like, for example, once again, Gardens by the Bay, and even the promenade around the bay. It's important to have all this breathing space in between buildings. Connecting people to places comfortably is important, because we're not just referring to cars and buses, but at the same time, when you go to a certain place, you need to walk from point A to point B, and we need to ensure that in urban design, we are planning to let you go from place to place comfortably, and ensure that you're sheltered and it's all-weather connectivity at all times. And last but not least, creating a sense of identity, something that you can actually relate to and tell the whole world that this is Singapore. So how do we do so? Because nowadays it's getting more and more complex to do planning and urban design, because there are many different requirements from stakeholders. Like, for example, some people might say, I want to check, if I build a new bridge, how would it improve the pedestrian flow? Another person might say, I want to know the location of the age and the size of the trees in the garden itself, so that I can plan for my master plan and growth of the garden. So in order to ensure efficient design, what we have resorted to is building a digital twin of Singapore. And many agencies have done so, including SLA yourself. They have built a digital twin of Singapore, and URA has also done another version that we will share more information later. And this is important because with the rapid evolution of technology, planners need all this data, whether it's 2D or 3D, in order to help us to plan better, plan smarter. And in the next few segments, I will share with you some case studies of how URA utilizes digital twin to improve our planning efforts. Digital data within URA exists in many different formats: 2D and 3D, GIS data and 3D data. And nowadays, the line in between both is starting to blur, because we have 3D GIS data as well. And what I'm trying to highlight here is that all these data it works hand in hand. Okay, whether it's internal data that we have within URA, external data that we get from external parties, and also 3D data. And more often than not, in order to have more complex simulations and analytics, you need to overlay all these different layers in order to have interesting outcomes. And as I just highlighted, there are many different processes in the planning process of URA. So the next segment that I'm going to touch on would be related to the concept plan, master plan, and the urban design process. Firstly, the data that we use in URA, it comes in different kinds of fidelity that I would like to call the level of detail. And for LD1, this is actually, it belongs to SLA. They do share our data with us, which is very useful, because more often than not, we do planning and we require different fidelities of 3D data. We do not always need high resolution 3D data. And this resolution is actually very useful because it's lightweight and easily navigable. So this LD2 data set is also obtained from SLA, who shared with us. And we use this with an internal software that we have in URA called the 3D Urban Planner Pro for simulation work. So what I'm doing over here is trying to simulate new developments within Marina Bay. So let's say in the future, I have new building blocks like this. that are the ones colored in blue. And I would like to check, how would this building block impact, for example, the urban form of Marina Bay? How would it change the view along a road in Marina Bay to, let's say, MBS or to the flyer? So you can see that I can even fly down to the street level to ensure that there is a clear view corridor along, let's say, I think this should be Bayfront Avenue, yep, that you can see MBS, even with these new developments. The third type of model that we have in URA are actually the LD3 models that we have commissioned a 3D modeler to build over a couple of years. And this is slightly higher in fidelity. You can see the level of details that we've included in the data set. And this is because, like I emphasized, we need different types of fidelity of models for different purposes. And this quality of models is very useful when you want to do 3D rendering, artist impressions, fly-throughs for exhibitions and for engaging the public. So you can see that even the roof garden of MBS itself is modeled with the deck chairs and the swimming pools and the trees as well. Yeah. So pretty detailed. So, I mean, we have 3D models, but the most important thing about data set is the updating of the data set to ensure that it is accurate. How do we do that? There are a couple of ways that we can explore doing that. Of course, like I mentioned, that we are receiving a lot of BIM file submissions from architects and developers. And we have tried, we are really in the process of trying to convert it into a suitable format that we can import into our database so that it seems as a sustainable source of updating the database itself. Another method that we're trying to explore is the use of drones and photogrammetry. So in a recent government land sales site that we have launched, which is at Jalan Anak Bukit, we realized that we actually do not have the updated model of the area. So what we did was that we used drones to fly around the area and did photogrammetry mapping. And then after that, the output itself is this image that you see on the left, the top left-hand corner over here. It's actually a really nice look and feel to the rendered image. And on the right-hand side is actually the data set that we intend to work together with SLA to acquire. So this would be data sets that was recently scanned in 2019. And we are looking forward to use this type of data because it is updated and includes vegetation data as well, which is often very useful for our planning work. In URA, we have also started our own drone team. So led by myself and a couple of other colleagues, we have registered ourselves with CAS. And this is because we feel that it is important for us to build up our competency in the maneuvering of drones, because drones are a very useful way on technology and planning as we move forward in the new era of planning. Be it taking photos and videos, pretty images like this, or moving forward for the use of drones in photogrammetry modeling. So this is Singapore Indoor Stadium. This was actually a very quick job. Went on site, spent 20 minutes, flew the drone, and came back with this output, which honestly is not a very nice model, but this is the first round of scan, and it was just done in 20 minutes. So imagine that the amount of scanning that we can actually do to map small localized areas in order to update our database. And in URA, when we do planning, we use a myriad of software. I mean, there's no one software that can have all solutions for you. And for different purposes, we actually have to rely on different software. Like for example, for modeling, we still use SketchUp, we still use Rhino, but at the same time, we are trying to push for architects and planners in URA to move towards a more GIS-centric way of doing 3D modeling, which is with the use of ArcGIS Pro and City Engine. And then for analytics, we also use our own internal software, proprietary software called 3D Planner Pro, which is a 3D GIS software. But at the same time, we're also trying to build out our competency in ArcGIS Pro and City Engine so that the planners in URA can do more complex simulations. So the importance of data-driven urban design will be highlighted in the next few examples. I will share with you how we do data-driven simulation with different types of software. So the important thing is different types of software, and the data set that we use is actually the same data set, but it is very important to ensure that it's interoperable so that we can use it in no matter what software that we want to do the simulation in. So first and foremost, the importance of views. So this image that you see over here is actually on the south of Singapore near Sentosa, and this hilly area that you see on the map is actually the southern ridges. And in the past, we used to safeguard important views from the ridge itself to the waterfront by using Pythagoras theorem. Yeah, believe it or not, we use Pythagoras theorem And we try to draw all these corridors, to try and second guess how the view would be like, and therefore buildings that are in front of the ridge cannot be of a certain height in order not to block the view. But now with digital model and software and systems, we can actually do actual validation of view corridor simulation very simply. So one example would be the use of 3D Urban Planner, a proprietary software that we have in URA. And in this example, what I'm trying to show is that you can imagine at the Merlion Park, if the development here is actually to be redeveloped, and we want to ensure that the view of the existing CBD skyline is not blocked, because if it's just like this, it's going to be a nightmare. Because when you stand at the Merlion Park, you can no longer see the beautiful skyline at the back of Fullerton. So instead of allowing the developers to come in and say, I want to build as high as this in order to maximize my floor area, we do simulations like this to check the view shed simulation. And the areas in red represents the buildings that you cannot see, that will be blocked by the building. And the areas in green represents the area that you can still see. And then we do a few iterations to ensure that, what's the optimal height of the building in order to ensure that like for example, key buildings like the Maybank or Ocean Financial Center can still be seen from the Merlion Park. So climate change and global warming is very real. It's an issue that we all have to address, especially with you can see that the rain has been pouring the past few days, and it's just been ponding quite badly. So in URA, we have also been trying to build out our competency and simulations that deals with computational fluid dynamics, like wind flow in the image that you see on the top right-hand corner, and also solar irradiance and shade simulation. On the topic of shade simulation, I would use Orchard Road as an example, and the software that we have used is actually ArcGIS Pro. If you go down to Orchard Road nowadays and you compare it to the past 10 years, you realize that it's rather botak. Then the trees have been cut because some of it, they're aging, some of it, they're sick, and therefore NParks have come in to cut down the trees so that it will not fall. And in a matter of time, the trees will diminish, and the amount of shade that we once received in Orchard Road will also diminish. And therefore, if we're going to plan for the Orchard pedestrian mall and want to ensure that shade is still provided at certain areas, we can do a shadow simulation using ArcGIS Pro. And by doing this shadow simulation, shadow analysis, right, it does not just tell you where the shadows are casted, but it actually informs you the accumulation of the shadows at certain areas so that you can know which areas actually receive the most number of shade over a period of time. So last but not least, I would like to introduce you to the concept of procedural modeling, and this is done using City Engine. And the topic that we're talking about is actually the policy that we have called the landscape replacement area. It's part of the LUSH guideline. Okay, and for this policy, it stipulates that developers have actually to replace the site area that they're building on by using vertical greenery within the new development itself. And this can come in the form of vertical green walls, sky terraces, roof gardens, many different kinds of plug and play combinations that they can actually use. So when we do the simulation internally within URA, we have to ensure that we are asking for the right things from developers. And how do we do that? We do so by using design thinking. Okay, so this is what the architects usually do. We do the manual simulation like this. But with City Engine itself, we can actually use software, okay, to do the simulation itself, because this is coded and this is procedural. So what I'm doing is just dragging and dropping the rule into the parcel, the polygon, and changing the land use. And once you change the land use, immediately you will see the building form being generated, and then you can see the parameters that you can actually tweak on the right-hand side in the inspector panel over here. Okay, the last portion that I'm going to touch on is actually the part on the design review portion and knowledge management. So when we deal with BIM files, we often face the issue of the file being too big, too heavy. And at the beginning, we tried to use the native BIM to review the files and to review the design of it. But later on, we realized that actually it's quite impossible. And we have to resort to plugins, like for example, the use of Enscape, in order to convert the BIM file into something that's more aesthetically pleasing for design reviews and also easily to navigate within the buildings. It's almost like you're playing a first-person shooter game like this. In the URA, we also have a room that we call the white room. So this is basically a multi-purpose room that has a curved wall. So we have the software that I mentioned just now, the 3D urban planner, that can be projected on this curved wall in order to have a more immersive design review experience that you see over here. We have also started to use the VR. So over here, you can actually see our CEO and our chief urban designer using the VR goggles to do design review of a new development. And it's very important to make sure that we have a proper workflow and the process when using VR, because you can't be immersed in the VR environment for too long. I mean, you start to feel sick. So this next image that you see here is actually the use of Hololens that we have tried to toy around with the 3D data set that we have. We've coded it we have also included some gesture controlled commands that you can see I'm clicking my finger and then trying to open the buildings and zooming into street level. And for recent exhibitions, we have also used AR because AR meaning augmented reality. With GIS datasets, we can very easily export all these vector layers and to beautify the layers and overlay it onto physical models to make it smarter and more engaging for people who are using the model for information. So you can see that this is for the GLD exhibition, and people are using the iPads to overlay information like, for example, pedestrian cycling network, green spaces on top of the physical model itself. And if you've been to the URA Center recently, before the COVID hit, you realize that in 2019, we actually have a new Islandwide model that you see in the picture over here. So this was actually done using 3D printing, and it was only possible because we have a robust data set of 3D models as a combination from different parties, from HDB, SLA, URA, and even JTC as well. We combined everything and then we 3D printed it, and this saved us a lot of time and effort. And with the GIS layers that we have within URA, we can easily export the layers and create them and convert them into overlays as part of the projection mapping show. Okay, with this, I've come to the end of my presentation. In summary, I guess I would just like to highlight that geospatial data itself is extremely important in our current work, and more so in the future work that we're going to do, because you can never underestimate the purpose of geospatial data. In my presentation, you can see that in the past, we only used to do it, only used to use this data for design review and for mainstream planning. But you can see that as technology evolves, we started to merge all this data together with other types of data and technology, like for example, the use of drones, the use of the data to create the Islandwide model. And in the future, I'm sure that with geospatial data, it can even be put to more effective and more dynamic uses for the planning of Singapore. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you so much for your presentation. So now we are moving on to the Q&A segment. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So anyone who has any questions, please leave your answers in the Q&A chat box. So the first question is, someone is asking whether can the slides be shared after your presentation?
Yeah, it would be a PDF version. I mean, I'm afraid I can't share the actual PowerPoint, but I can, I think it's possible, definitely, to share the PDF version of it.
Okay, perhaps you can send over to me, then I'll send over to the attendees who are interested in having a copy.
No problem.
And the second question is, which product is used for digital twin? Can you also repeat the product used for simulation and planning of new developments?
So within URA, we don't actually restrict the use of specific products for the planners and the architects. We encourage them to use whatever software that they are comfortable with. And some of the software would include ArcGIS Pro, SketchUp, City Engine for procedural modeling. And the proprietary software that we have created for use in URA is called 3D Urban Planner. So this is not available commercially, but it's just the software that we've created for our planning use.
I see. And about 3D digital model, have all areas in Singapore been mapped out in 3D?
I think maybe SLA would be the better party to answer this question. Yeah. If I could answer it on behalf of SLA, I mean, together with SLA, we have pretty much mapped up the whole of Singapore. Yep. And UAE has stopped doing it since 2014. I mean, in the past, we used to commission the vendor to go on site to take photos and model it manually. I mean, it was a painstaking process. But then SLA came in and then they did the whole round of a LiDAR scan. And in 2019, they did one more round of scan. So we are actually looking forward to them to collaborate and to share the data with different agencies.
Yeah, I think for attendees who are interested in the 3D model, tomorrow we are having the 3D beta launch at 11 a.m. So you can also register at the registration page to sign up for tomorrow's event to know more about our 3D maps. Yeah. And another person is asking whether he could have your contact. So perhaps, Eugene, you can leave your email address in the chat box if you're comfortable.
Sure.
And if the attendees have any more questions, they can reach out to you directly.
Okay.
And the next question is, how often do URA create digital maps over Singapore?
Digital maps over Singapore. I mean, if you're referring to the different planning layers that we have, we actually do it quite often. I mean, it's actually part of the master plan process. Whenever we review the master plan, it is not just a review of the land use layer, but it is a review of multiple different layers. Like, for example, special detailed control plans, which actually talks about the parks and water bodies in Singapore. We have the building height plan, we have the pedestrian connectivity plan, we have the various types of different plans. I mean, but if your question is how often do we create digital maps over Singapore, I would say that with every opportunity, we would look and explore new maps that could actually help us to inform our planning even better. Like, for example, in the recent round of master plan, I mean, in the past, there was no such thing as an underground master plan. But in the recent round of master plan, URA decided to try something new and to create an underground master plan, which actually comprised of underground infrastructure in order for us to help to plan more efficiently in the future when people are actually building things that are underground, for people to coordinate with one another, whether you're a developer or whether you're in the government.
And we have a question from Zhen Hui, who is asking, how can underground geospatial data be collected and used to optimize above and underground land use?
We do have a team in URA called the Underground Works Department. They are the one who specializes in the collection of underground data. And it's very right to point out that it's a challenge to collect underground geospatial data, because a lot of it are actually legacy data, and we do not know whether it's accurate or whether it is inaccurate. Yeah, but moving forward, what we can do is actually we can work with developers and we can work with the government agencies to collaborate. So that if you're a developer submitting a BP file, a building permit file, which is actually a very detailed model, including all the infrastructure, the piles and the columns in the building, we could work with BCA to start to collect all this data and input it into the underground master plan. And if you are a government agency working on, let's say, underground infrastructure, we could all come together to collate all the data set and have it centralized in the underground master plan.
Thank you. And we have another question. When redesigning urban areas, do you also look at the impact of the environment, such as change in air quality and noise congestion?
We do, actually. I mean, this is also a very important aspect that we look to. Unfortunately, in URA, I mean, I have to be honest that we do not have the technical expertise to analyze such parameters, but we do work with researchers. We do work with other agencies who are more experts in such areas. Like, for example, HDB, they have developed a software together with A-Star called the IEM, which is capable of analyzing the impact of noise together with wind flow and together with sound. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, this is an aspect that we look to, especially if the development is located next to, like, for example, a highway or located next to the airport.
I see. And perhaps we can have one last final question. From Guo Xiang, he's asking how much of the software development work is done in-house versus outsourced?
It really differs across department. I mean, for my own department, the urban design team, because most of us are actually architects, so we're not trained in software development. But instead, what we are trained in is actually some of us are trained in coding. Whether it's Grasshopper, whether it's City Engine. So instead of developing the software, like for example, we use City Engine. We do not code. We do not create the software, but we actually work with the company to create the codes and the scripts and the rules that actually allow us to control and manipulate the simulation. Yeah. So I would say within our team, maybe a 40% of the work that we do are actually controlled and coded by ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Eugene, for answering all the questions. I know there are still quite a few questions that are unanswered. So perhaps the attendees can reach out to you directly for their burning questions.
In my email as well. Yeah.
So to all attendees, thank you so much for your time in attending the webinar today. And also we hope that you've enjoyed the sharing by Eugene. So before we go, we would like to encourage all of you to attend the other webinars that we have lined up for you for the rest of Singapore Geospatial Week. So we'll be flashing a QR code on the slide, as you can see, and you can scan in to register for other webinars that you might be interested in. So thank you so much, Eugene, and the attendees, and we hope that you stay safe and we see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.